They were heroes, villains, record breakers, and cautionary tales players who lit up stadiums with jaw-dropping home runs, clutch hits, and game-saving pitches, only to see it all vanish in a flash, not because their talent faded, but because of choices that turned cheers into silence. Some gambled away their careers. Others chased an edge in the shadows. A few crossed lines off the field that no stat line could excuse, and yet each believed they'd never be the one to fall. This is the story of the game's most unforgettable exiles. The men whose names live on not in the record books, but in the rule books as warnings to everyone who follows, because in baseball, you don't just play for wins, you play for your legacy, and one wrong decision can erase it forever. They say baseball is America's pastime, but behind the roar of the crowd, the crack of the bat, and the stories of childhood heroes, there's a darker chapter, one filled with whispers of backroom deals, syringes hidden in gym bags, bets placed on games in smoky rooms, and careers that went from immortal to infamous overnight. And what's most chilling isn't just that some of the most talented men to ever step onto a diamond fell from grace, it's that their stories tell us just how fragile greatness really is. Because in baseball, your legacy isn't written in the numbers alone, it's written in the choices you make when no one is watching, and sometimes those choices can erase everything you built faster than a single swing of the bat. So tonight, we're pulling back the curtain, starting not in the dusty archives of history, but in the modern era, where one of the game's brightest stars went from face of the franchise to a cautionary tale almost overnight. His name, Fernando Tatis Jr., a player who burst onto the scene in 2019 like a firework exploding over Petco Park. Just 20 years old, all swagger and electric energy. The kind of guy who made you want to tune in every night because you never knew what he'd do next. His rookie season wasn't just good, it was historic, slashing .317, .379, .590 with an OPS plus of 154, meaning he was 54% better than the average hitter. And in 2021, he didn't just play, he dominated, hitting 40 home runs to lead the National League and posting an OPS plus of 166. At that point, the Padres didn't just see him as their star, they saw him as the star, the future, the guy they built their entire identity around. But then, before the 2020 season could truly unfold, the narrative changed. A motorcycle accident in the offseason led to wrist surgery, a setback sure, but nothing compared to what was coming next. Because before he could return, news broke he had tested positive for clostebol, an anabolic steroid, and banned. His explanation? That it was a treatment for ringworm, but in the court of public opinion, that excuse rang hollow. The league came down hard, 80 games gone, just like that. The rest of 2022 erased, and with it, his chance to write the ending to the season he dreamed of. Endorsements vanished, Adidas dropped him, and while he returned in 2023 still capable of all-star level play, something had shifted. The peaks didn't look quite as high, and fans wondered if they were watching the same player they once thought could be the face of baseball, because the truth is, in sports, suspicion sticks, no matter how many home runs you hit afterward. And if Tatis' story is a warning shot to the new generation, the next one is a reminder that even the most accomplished can fall. Alex Rodriguez, better known as a Rod, is one of the most famous baseball players to ever live, and for good reason. Over a 22-year career, he made 14 All-Star appearances, won 3 MVPs, 10 Silver Sluggers, and a World Series title with the Yankees in 2009. His career numbers are jaw-dropping: 117 point for WAR, a .295, .380, .550/line, nearly 700 home runs, and over 3,100 hits. On paper, a Hall of Fame lock, but baseball isn't played on paper, and legacies aren't voted on by box scores alone. In 2009, Rodriguez admitted to using steroids during his time with the Texas Rangers from 2001 to 2003, saying he felt intense pressure to live up to the expectations that came with his massive contract. But that wasn't the end. Investigations later tied him to biogenesis, an anti-aging clinic supplying HGH to athletes, and in 2013, MLB suspended him for 211 games, the longest non-lifetime suspension in the sport's history at the time. He appealed, played out the 2013 season, but the suspension was upheld and he sat out all of 2014. When he returned, he played the more seasons before retiring. And though his statistical resume is historic, his Hall of Fame chances are slim because his name is now inseparable from one of baseball's biggest scandals. What's striking when you look at Tatis and Rodriguez side by side is the contrast in career stages, one at the dawn of superstardom, the other a veteran cementing his legacy, but both proving the same point, that in a game built on trust between players, fans, and the integrity of competition, the moment that trust is broken, no record, no highlight reel, no championship ring can make the doubt disappear. And maybe that's the most brutal truth of all, that in baseball, greatness and disgrace often sit just inches apart on the bench. Some falls from grace are spectacular in scale, shaking the entire sport. Others are almost baffling in their quiet self-destructs. A few illustrate that second category better than Tucupita Marcano, a player whose name wasn't yet etched into the minds of casual fans who hadn't built the kind of legacy that could survive a scandal, and yet still managed to throw it all away in one of the most avoidable ways imaginable. Marcano's career was unremarkable on the surface, just 149 games split between the Padres and Pirates, hitting .217 with an OPS of 63, a utility infielder, trying to carve out a role, the kind of guy whose path to a long career would be built on hustle, reliability, and staying out of trouble. But in 2023, while sidelined with an injury, Marcano made a decision that would erase any chance of that future. He placed bets, not just on baseball, but on MLB games, and not just on MLB games, but on his own team, the Pirates, 25 bets in total tied to their games, buried in a staggering 131 MLB-related wagers. This wasn't a one-time lapse of judgment, it was a pattern. And when the investigation concluded in 2024, the league hit him with the harshest possible penalty, a lifetime ban. The irony? Marcano won only for 0.3% of those bets, just 10 wagers in total, meaning he didn't just sacrifice his career, he did it for almost nothing, financially and reputationally. And while his name may fade quickly from headlines, his case is a reminder that MLB's stance on gambling is uncompromising, forged in the fire of past scandals like the Black Sox and Pete Rose. And every generation seems to produce someone willing to test those boundaries. But if Marcano's case is a footnote, the next story was a headline tsunami. Trevor Bauer, a pitcher who at one point was among the most dominant in the National League, in 2020 posting a 1.73 ERA with 100 strikeouts in just 73 innings, winning the NL Cy Young Award, the pinnacle for a pitcher. That success earned him a massive 3-year, $102 million contract with the Dodgers. And early in 2021, he delivered with an 8-5 record, a 2.59 ERA, and a 163 ERA plus. But Bauer was never just about stats. He had a polarizing public persona, outspoken, combative, willing to mix it up with critics, and that personality became overshadowed by something far darker when allegations of sexual assault surfaced from two women. MLB launched its own investigation under the league's domestic violence policy, and in April 2022, Bauer received an unprecedented suspension of full seasons without pay, later reduced on appeal to 194 games. No criminal charges were filed, with the LA County District Attorney citing insufficient evidence. But the damage to his MLB career was done. The Dodgers released him in 2023, and while Bauer pursued defamation lawsuits, winning $300, 0 in one case, and seeing one accuser later charged with defrauding him, public opinion didn't shift nearly as easily as the legal outcome. Bauer offered to return to MLB at the league minimum salary, but no team bid, so he took his talent overseas, pitching in Japan's MPB for the Yokohama Dana Bay Stars, where his numbers showed he could still perform. 14-7 record, to .86 ERA, 200 strikeouts in 210 innings, but the reality is that sometimes exile isn't about whether you can play, it's about whether the league wants you back. And in Bauer's case, the answer, at least for now, has been silence. What ties Marcano and Bauer together is that neither story is purely about performance. These are cases about judgment, trust, and perception in one. A French player erased his future for pocket change gambling wins. In the other, an elite pitcher lost his spot not because of a dip in ability, but because off-field allegations made his presence in the league a liability. Both remind us that in MLB's world, talent might get you into the clubhouse, but it's the choices you make when you're not on the mound or at the plate that determine how long you get to stay. Some scandals are born in the modern glare of social media, every update dissected in real time. Others are relics from a century ago, yet still loom like storm clouds over the sport's conscience. And in this part, we're moving between both ends of that spectrum. Beginning with Addison Russell, a name that, in 2015, was synonymous with promise. The kind of top prospect whose call up to the Chicago Cubs felt like the beginning of something special. His rookie year numbers were modest, but respectable for a young shortstop pointed for .307, .389 with 13 home runs, and in 2016, he seemed to be hitting his stride, delivering 21 home runs and 95 RBIs, making him only the second Cubs shortstop in history to drive in over 90 runs. Behind the legendary Ernie Banks, that same year, Russell played a key role in ending the Cubs' 108-year championship drought, hitting multiple crucial home runs during the NLCS against the Dodgers, and helping secure their long-awaited World Series title, the kind of moment that should have immortalized him in Chicago's baseball history. But just 2 seasons later, the narrative took a sharp and irreversible turn. In 2018, MLB placed Russell on administrative leave while investigating allegations from his ex-wife that he had committed domestic abuse. The investigation concluded that the allegations were credible, and he was suspended under the league's domestic violence policy. Russell returned in 2019, but his performance was underwhelming, and the Cubs, perhaps wary about the diminished production and the public backlash, designated him for assignment. He never played in MLB again, instead finding work in international leagues like the KBO in South Korea. And while his fall lacked the scale of a Pete Rose or the infamy of a scandal, it's a stark reminder that talent can't insulate you from consequences when personal conduct crosses certain lines. And if Russell's story is about how quickly individual reputations can vanish, the next is about an event that nearly poisoned the sport itself, the Black Sox scandal of 1919. It remains perhaps the most infamous episode in baseball history. The Chicago White Sox, arguably the most talented team in the league, entered the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds, and 8 of their players conspired to deliberately lose in exchange for payments from gamblers. The plot didn't just cheat the game, it insulted the trust of fans who thought they were watching competition at its purest. And while a jury found the players not guilty of criminal charges, newly appointed Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis banned them all from professional baseball for life. The 8-men Chick Gandil, Eddie Chicot, Happy Felsch, Fred McMullen, Sweet Risberg, Buck Weaver, Lefty Williams, and the most famous of all, Shoeless Joe Jackson, became a cautionary tale etched into the DNA of the sport. Jackson's case remains especially controversial. His career slash line of .356, .4 to 3, .517, and 60 to point to WAR put him at a Hall of Fame level. And his performance in that series was stellar, hitting .375 with 12 hits, leading many to believe he wasn't truly part of the fix, yet he admitted attending early meetings with the gamblers, as did Weaver, who claimed he refused to take part but still didn't report the scheme. Others, like Lefty Williams, pitched suspiciously poorly, going 0-3 with a 6.63 ERA, far from his 22-14 record and 3.91 ERA that season. The fallout was seismic. Fans questioned whether any game could be trusted. Owners feared the public would abandon baseball entirely. Atlantis' iron-fisted governance became the league's moral compass for decades to come. What connects Addison Russell's 21st century exile and the century-old disgrace of the Black Sox isn't the nature of the offense. Those are worlds apart, but the fact that in both, once the trust between player and public is broken, the stain lingers far longer than the player's career. Whether you're a middle infielder in 2018 or a superstar in 1919, the principle holds. The game survives without you, but you don't survive without the game's trust. Some names fade from the headlines because time buries them under fresher scandals, but others fade because they never had the towering fame to begin with, which makes their exile feel almost ghostly, like a rumor you can't quite place, and Benny Koff fits that mold perfectly. A man whose career was promising enough to earn him the nickname the Ty Cobb of the Feds during his time in the short-lived Federal League, where he hit .357 with 376 hits and 20 home runs in just 290 games. When the league folded, he landed with the New York Giants, still producing, still making his case as a legitimate major leaguer. But in late 1920, Koff and his brother were accused of stealing a car and selling it, and though he was acquitted in court, the trial raised what Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis called serious questions about his character. Landis refused to reinstate him, insisting that even the shadow of suspicion could undermine baseball's integrity. In modern terms, it's like being locked out of your profession for failing a vibes check the legal system cleared you, but the league decided that wasn't enough. Koff's story is a relic of an era where the commissioner's word was law, but it also foreshadows how MLB has always treated integrity as more than just a legal question, which brings us to a man whose case spanned the 1980s and 1990s and whose exile was not about a single act, but a pattern. Steve Howe, an all-star left-handed pitcher who burst into the majors with the Dodgers, winning Rookie of the Year in 1980 and helping them win the 1981 World Series. His early years were golden when he 3 wins, 8.17 ERA, and a 160 to ERA plus over his first 4 seasons, but then came the off-field spiral, a struggle with cocaine addiction that would define his career more than his pitching ever could. In 1984, he was suspended for the entire season after his first violation, and what followed was a dizzying cycle of comebacks and relapses. In 1985, missing games after skipping team commitments. In 1986, 2 more suspensions for testing positive, arrest in the early 90s, and finally, in 1992, a permanent ban from Commissioner Fay Vincent. Howe appealed and was reinstated, eventually finding some stability with the Yankees, even posting a stellar 1.80 ERA with 15 saves in 1994. But the shadow of his 7 total suspensions never left him. Howe's story is one of squandered potential. Unlike Koff, he had the raw numbers and big game pedigree to be remembered fondly, but his career became a case study in how MLB's tolerance for repeated infractions eventually hits a wall. What unites Koff and Howe is the question of second chances. Koff never got his despite legal innocence. Howe got more than most despite repeated violations. And both outcomes leave you wondering whether MLB's justice is about consistent principle or the unpredictable mix of public perception, commissioner philosophy, and the league's need to protect its image at all costs. Some players return from scandal to tepid applause, others to a chorus of boos. But in both cases, the field never feels quite the same afterward. And Marcell Ozuna's arc with the Atlanta Braves is a study in that uneasy limbo. When he joined the team in 2020, his bat was electric, slashing .271, .350, .503 with a 131 OPS, and smashing 137 home runs over his tenure. He was the kind of middle-of-the-order hitter you build a postseason run around. And after a productive 2020 on a 1-year, $18 million deal, Atlanta rewarded him with a 4-year, $64 million contract. But in May 2021, that momentum came to a screeching halt when Ozuna was arrested for domestic violence against his wife. The footage released didn't just make headlines, it made defenses of him nearly impossible. MLB suspended him, and while the charges were later withdrawn, the damage was done. He missed the Braves' 2021 World Series triumph entirely, and even when he returned, the conversation about him was split, some arguing he'd served his punishment and should be allowed to move forward, others unwilling to ever cheer his name again. The odd thing is that performance doesn't erase perception. Ozuna could hit 40 home runs tomorrow, and for a segment of the fan base, that incident would still define him, and in a way, that's the shadow of modern sports. Everything exists in permanent public memory, and every at-bat happens with a past you can't erase. Jurickson Profar's case is newer, but carries a different sting. A career journeyman who spent over a decade in the majors as a versatile, quietly effective player, Profar had a breakout season in 2024, slashing point to 83, .380, point for 5.9, with a 130 for ops, hitting 20 for home runs and notching 158 hits, finally earning his first All-Star appearance and a Silver Slugger award. It was the kind of season that transforms a solid player into a star, and the Braves clearly believed he could sustain it, signing him to a 3-year, $42 million deal in January 2025, but by March 31st, that optimism evaporated when Profar was suspended 80 games for testing positive for PEDs. He claimed he never knowingly took anything illegal, but the suspicion that his career year was chemically boosted instantly rewrote the narrative. For Atlanta, already struggling that season, losing a key bat felt like a gut punch for Profar. The timing was devastating, his breakthrough now overshadowed by a question mark that will follow him for the rest of his career. Ozuna's and Profar's situations differ, one about personal conduct, the other about competitive integrity, but in the public eye, both blur into the same uneasy truth, no matter the reason. Once your name appears on the league's suspension list, you are never again just a baseball player. You're a baseball player with an asterisk, and those asterisks have a way of showing up in every conversation about your career, no matter how much time passes. Some players seem untouchable, not just because of their stats, but because of the way they're woven into the very fabric of the sport's history, and Roberto Alomar was one of those players. A second baseman so smooth, so instinctive, and so consistently excellent that for most of his 17-year career, the question wasn't if he would make the Hall of Fame, but how high on the all-time list he would be ranked. He slashed .300, .371, .443 with an OPS plus of 116, 110 Gold Gloves, made 12 straight All-Star games from 1990 to 2001, was named ALCS MVP in 1992, and helped the Toronto Blue Jays capture back-to-back World Series titles in '92 and '93. When he was inducted into Cooperstown, it felt like a coronation, the official stamp on a career that had already been canonized by fans. But in 2021, Alomar became the first player in history to be both a Hall of Famer and permanently ineligible for MLB at the same time, following an investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct from 2014 involving a female Blue Jays staff member. The league banned him from all MLB-affiliated activities, and the Blue Jays moved swiftly to distance themselves, removing his name from their level of excellence and even unretiring his number so it could be worn by pitcher Jordan Hicks. It was a stunning reversal. One day, a revered ambassador of the game, the next, a name scrubbed from the organization's public honor roll, and it was proof that even legends aren't immune to expulsion when the league decides the cost of keeping them is higher than the cost of cutting them out. And yet, for all the shock of Alomar's fall, perhaps no ban in MLB history has carried the same cultural weight as Pete Rose's Charlie Hustle, the all-time hits leader with 4,156 knocks, a .303 lifetime average, a 79.6 career WAR, 3 World Series rings, and a reputation as the hardest-working player of his generation, the heartbeat of the Cincinnati Reds' Big Red Machine. But in 1989, while managing the Reds, rumors began to swirl that Rose had bet on baseball. The investigation found that he placed bets on 52 Reds games in 1987, though there was no evidence he bet against his own team. Rose denied it, but accepted a permanent spot on the league's ineligible list, perhaps thinking it would be a temporary exile. But 2 years later, the Hall of Fame officially barred anyone on that list from induction, a decision Rose claimed he never saw coming. For decades, he petitioned for reinstatement, supported by fans who argued the punishment didn't fit the crime, especially compared to other transgressions in the sport's history. But the league never budged. Only in 2025 did Commissioner Rob Manfred alter the policy to allow removal from the list after death, Rose having passed in September 2024, meaning he could be considered by the Veterans Committee in 2027. And here's where Rose's case continues to spark debate. Gambling is once again a central part of MLB's economy through legalized sports betting partnerships. Yet the man who never bet against his own team remains locked out of the game's highest honor, while the league profits off the very act that destroyed his career. Alomar's and Rose's Exiles couldn't be more different in nature, one tied to personal misconduct, the other to the sport's most sacred rule. But they converge on the same point. Baseball's memory is long, its appetite for redemption selective, and its sense of justice shaped as much by optics as by any universal principle, and that is why these stories aren't just about what happened, they're about who the league decides it can forgive, and who it decides must remain a ghost. When you lay all these stories side by side, from Fernando Tatis Jr.'s meteoric rise and stumble to Alex Rodriguez's Hall of Fame caliber career undercut by scandal, from Tucupita Marcano's baffling lifetime ban for a handful of losing bets to Trevor Bauer's exile without a criminal conviction, from Addison Russell's championship heroics to his abrupt erasure, from the century-old shadow of the Black Sox to Benny Koff's quiet exile, from Steve Howe's repeated substance abuse suspensions to Marcell Ozuna's divisive return, from Jurickson Profar's breakout season under suspicion to Roberto Alomar's stunning fall, from Cooperstown's grace, and finally Pete Rose's eternal fight with baseball's most unforgiving rule. You start to see that the connective tissue isn't the specific offense, it's the way the sport defines trust. Because in baseball, trust is the currency that makes everything else work. Fans trust that the competition is fair. Teammates trust that you're pulling in the same direction. Owners trust that you won't drag the brand through the mud. And when that trust is broken, whether by gambling, PEDs, violence, deceit, or even just the appearance of impropriety, the punishment is never just about the rule you broke. It's about the message your absence sends to everyone else. Some of these players will be remembered for the brilliance they showed before they fell. Others will be remembered only for the fall itself. But all of them exist as cautionary tales in a sport that clings to its myths of purity even as it wrestles with its own contradictions, because the truth is, baseball isn't a morality play, it's a business, a spectacle, and a tradition. And who gets forgiven often depends less on what they did than on how much the game still needs them. And maybe that's why these stories stick with us. Not because we can't imagine making their mistakes, but because we can. And because somewhere in the back of our minds, we know that the line between legend and exile is so thin you could draw it in the chalk along the first base line. So the lesson is simple and brutal. Talent might get you to the big leagues, but integrity is what keeps you there. And once you lose it, you may never get the chance to win it back.